Hey guys, welcome to another Unity 5 tutorial today, and we're going to be looking at doing and activating or disabling components or scripts via scripting in C# as part of the next step, because in the last episode we did about turning game objects on and off, so this is just a step forward, and sometimes you might need to turn a particular component off from your character, let's say, or you might need to turn a script off when you don't want it to be alive anymore. So let's give an example here. So on this first one controller, I'll just add the first script that we made in really early in this series, and for the sake of this it doesn't matter what it has to say, so we're just going to disable it by making it disable it, and it'll just untick itself, so it'll just not make it work anymore, so it won't run any lines of code. So what we'll do is, like we did in our previous video, we'll do it on a trigger to make sure that it's sort of obvious and in a game example. So I'll open up the trigger event game object script that we'd seen last time, and if you're following through from sort of this point and you've not seen any others, you can look back or you can just follow along from here. So when you're here is that, as we've done it before, we'd look for the game object that we needed to find, and then we'd set active. Now we're going to do something very similar to this. So let's imagine that we need to find the player, and the player has that script that we want to disable. So what we're going to say is we're going to go public game object with 2 capitals, and then we're just going to write player. It doesn't matter what we write here, it can be anything, but this easily allows us to identify what we need to do. So with player there, when we enter the collision, what we can do is we can say I will just comment this line out so it doesn't deactivate the script before we get to it. So under here I'll say player dot get component, and then we will have 2 angled brackets, then 2 brackets after there. So what we want to say in this get component is the actual script that we're going to be looking for. So what we're going to be looking for is first script, and it already knows that that's alive in our game. And then what we want to do is, then after the 2 brackets we say dot enabled equals false. So all it's doing is our reference that we're going to give it, we're going to say player, so the player or whatever game object we're looking for him, we're going to say we're going to grab the component. The angle brackets for C# are required to find the component that you're looking for, and then the 2 brackets afterwards are required in this statement, and then afterwards we say dot enabled because we want to say whether it's going to be true or false to be enabled. So what I'll do is I'll save this out and I will show this as an example, and you can see that on there is the first script. So we need to select our trigger object that we've got, and the trigger object will now have player, so it's looking for the player now. So what we're going to do is we're going to just grab whatever our player is for this instance, so it's first person controller, and you will see that the first script is actually ticked. Now I will leave this unmaximized, so when we play the game you expect this, so if you watch this we expect when we go through the collision that will turn off. So I'm there, I walk in front and the script is now disabled. And as an example, we can do exactly the same thing if we want the script to be true. So say, we want it to become active when we go through the collision, we can do that. Or say, this is just another example, say we want to do something differently entirely, and we want to say access the mesh renderer on this quad, on this plane that we've got for the floor. Is the mesh renderer, if you untick that, it won't render the object anymore. So this is a slightly different, but in the same sort of instance, exactly the same. So what we can do is we can say that we have another public game object, which is type floor. Then under here we can say that floor.getComponent with your 2 angled brackets with 2 brackets afterwards, dot enabled equals false in exactly the same way. But what we want to say this time is we'll start writing mesh renderer. And so instead of specifying the script that we're after, we're just looking for the mesh renderer. So what I could do here is on my quad, I could make sure that mesh renderer is ticked, but remember that when you're doing your script, you need to add the public reference in the inspector if you are doing it. So when we go through it, you expect the floor to disappear and first script to become enabled. Now in the script, I just cleared up the things that were there before to make this easier to read. So all we're doing is we're referencing, we're saying get component, we're giving the component that we're looking for, so it's anything that could be on the object, and we're saying .enabled equals true or false. And then, like in the other video, you can do it in a similar way with looking for tags and things like that. So you could say private game object, and we could call this, for this instance, player. Call this player 2 just for this so they don't conflict, player 2. Now what we can do here is say that player 2 equals game object dot find game object with tag, and then open the brackets in quotes. We can say player because that's what our tag of our player usually is. We'll put a semicolon, then we expect that player2.getComponent first script is equal to true. So now when we check our trigger, we want to make sure it's enabled. We haven't got a reference in there yet. I've just made it public so we can see it in this instance. And the first script is off. So when we press play, we expect on the trigger, it found the first person controller automatically because our player or first person controller was tagged player. And now we expect when we go through the collision for first script to be enabled. So we'll do that, and first script was enabled because we can see it there. Now to optimize your code a little bit, you can set that to private because it does it all for you in the background and there's no need to have a public variable here. Now it's disappeared, it's not in the inspector, so it's just hidden for that script itself. So hopefully this helped you be able to enable and disable some components on objects or on anything that you see in your game, and using it on a trigger event, just on an on trigger event, and looking for the tag player and doing some enables and setting it to true and false. So thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Cheers.